We all knew that he wasn't very well.
Yeah, it was it was a shock for us. I mean, when I heard yesterday.
Ozzy Osbourne wasn't just a rock star. He was the voice of a generation, the prince of heavy metal, and a man who turned struggle into legend. From Birmingham streets to sold-out arenas worldwide, his story is one of music, friendship, and an unforgettable legacy. The final chapter of Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy Osbourne was more than just a legendary rock star. He was an icon of heavy metal, renowned for his electrifying voice and his wild, unpredictable lifestyle. Yet behind the fame and the chaos, Ozzy faced personal struggles that quietly shaped his life. Born with dyslexia, he also suspected he had severe ADHD, making concentration and learning difficult from a young age. Throughout his career, he battled substance misuse, which he often linked to the tremors he endured daily. In 2003, after years of uncertainty, Ozzy received a diagnosis of a genetic form of Parkinson's disease known as the Parkin2 gene mutation. This type of Parkinson's progresses more slowly than others, but remained serious. Despite the diagnosis, he stayed determined and optimistic. In 2020, he told fans he had been living with Parkinson's for years and was not near death, though the disease gradually reshaped his daily life. Over time, Ozzy required daily medication, experienced hearing loss, and faced challenges understanding conversation, a struggle many witnessed on his family's reality series, The Osbournes. In early 2019, he was hospitalized after severe flu complications turned into pneumonia. This illness forced him to cancel his European tour, and while recovering at home, he suffered a fall that caused additional injuries, ending his performances for that year. In 2020, further complications forced the cancellation of his North American tour. He traveled to Switzerland for treatment, and during the same year revealed he had been diagnosed with emphysema. By 2025, Parkinson's had further weakened him, affecting his speech and mobility. Yet Ozzy still performed one final time during the Back to the Beginning farewell concert, a closing chapter for his legendary stage career. Ozzy passed away at his Buckinghamshire home on July 22, 2025, at the age of 76. Respiratory failure due to advanced Parkinson's was the cause. Sharon Osbourne, along with their children Amy, Kelly, and Jack, were at his side. The family confirmed his passing had been expected and medically supervised, with Sharon coordinating his final moments to honor his wishes. Ozzy had expressed a desire to pass away at home rather than in a hospital. From July onwards, the family meticulously planned his care, ensuring medical staff and equipment were on hand, while shielding everything from media access. Only Sharon was present during his final moments, with Jack recalling a farewell video call days before, where Ozzy communicated his goodbyes through eye movements and facial expressions. He passed without life support machinery, surrounded by family, alert and dignified, and his body was privately prepared for burial at a location he chose. The funeral was intimate, strictly for family, and Sharon personally oversaw all arrangements. Music played included new recordings Ozzy had completed after his 2019 accident. The final song, a special remix of See You on the Other Side from 2023, was personally chosen by him. While fans grieved the loss of a musical legend, questions remained about Tony Iommi and the private words exchanged between him and Ozzy during those last moments, a poignant ending to a life that defined a generation. Even in death, Ozzy's legacy continues to influence heavy metal and inspire countless fans worldwide. His story reminds us that behind the wild stage persona was a man who faced immense challenges with courage, love for family, and unshakable dedication to his music, leaving a legacy that will echo for decades. Tony Iommi's heart-wrenching farewell to Ozzy Osbourne.
What a shock. The thing that everyone is feeling today is shock. We all knew that he wasn't very well, but after that triumphant concert...
The morning of July 23, 2025, carried a weight no one could shake. The world was still reeling from the news of Ozzy Osbourne's passing, Amid the grief, Tony Iommi, Ozzy's lifelong friend and bandmate, finally spoke publicly. Tony had shared decades with Ozzy through fame, battles with addiction, and countless triumphs. But now his voice broke under the sorrow. He no longer spoke as a rock legend. He spoke as a friend who had lost his other half. In an emotional sit-down with ITV News, Tony confessed that the reality of Ozzy's death didn't hit immediately. "When I woke up, it just slammed into me like a ton of bricks," he said, his eyes downcast, voice thick with emotion. Just hours before Ozzy passed, Tony received a final, quiet message from him. Simple words, heavy with meaning. "I'm really tired. No energy left." At the time, Tony had sensed something was wrong, but only in hindsight did the message feel like a gentle goodbye. He now believes Ozzy pushed himself to the absolute limit to deliver one final performance for his fans. Tony recounted the last rehearsals with Ozzy. The singer's strength was waning. His body could no longer endure long performances. They structured the shows around him. Sing a song, pause, share memories, smile through the exhaustion. It wasn't about perfection. It was about honoring decades of music and friendship. Everyone felt it, the silent understanding that this was their final chapter together. Ozzy's last wish was simple, yet profoundly moving. He didn't want a global farewell tour or a lavish ceremony. He only wanted one final moment to thank his fans, and he wanted it in Birmingham, the city where it all began. He wanted to leave doing what he loved, where it started, Tony said softly. That final performance, small and intimate, became his ultimate gift, a quiet, heartfelt goodbye. For Tony, losing Ozzy wasn't just losing a bandmate. Geezer Bill and I didn't just lose a bandmate. We lost our brother, he said. Their friendship had begun in Birmingham's working-class streets long before fame, before screaming crowds, before studios. Two boys, Ozzy, the class clown, loud and mischievous, and Tony, quiet, reflective, serious, shared a bond that money and fame could never replicate. Both had grown up with little, dreaming of escaping factory life through music. Those early years forged a connection stronger than any stage or spotlight. Tony remembered Ozzy not just for his humor and wild spirit, but for an irrepressible spark that defined him. Their journey together, from schoolyard friends to pioneers of heavy metal, was more than music. It was life, dreams, and survival shared. The end of Ozzy's life marked the closing of a lifelong bond. Tony lost a part of himself that could never be replaced. Their story reminds us that beyond the roar of the crowd, behind the screaming guitars, existed a friendship built on trust, laughter, and shared dreams. Tony's grief reflects not just the loss of a music legend, but the farewell to a brother who had been by his side for over half a century. Looking back, the legacy of Black Sabbath and the friendship at its core illustrates how music and companionship intertwine, leaving echoes that outlast even the most powerful stage lights. This wasn't just the end of Ozzy Osbourne, it was the end of a story that began in the streets of Birmingham, carried through decades of highs and lows, and ended in the quiet dignity of one final goodbye. From Birmingham to legend, Ozzy and Tony's incredible journey.
It couldn't sink in. I thought, it can't be. I only had a text off him the day before. It just seemed...
Birmingham wasn't the place you'd expect rock legends to emerge from. The skies were often gray, and life demanded grit. Yet from this tough city, two boys began to dream bigger than their surroundings. Ozzy Osbourne and Tony Iommi didn't start as close friends. In the early days, they barely spoke, only exchanging short greetings in school corridors. But the hardships of Aston slowly drew them together. Shared struggles and small moments of laughter created a bond that would last a lifetime. After school, they often crossed paths, sometimes in back streets, other times while walking home. Music became a shared language between them, a way to escape the monotony of factory town life. Long before the name Black Sabbath existed, before stages and screaming fans, there were just two boys, one loud and mischievous, the other quiet and thoughtful. Somehow they clicked. That early connection would survive decades of fame, chaos, and personal battles. Beneath it all, they remained those boys from Aston. Their friendship was deeper than any band or fame could create. Tony Iommi, now in his late 70s, doesn't just remember a bandmate. He remembers the boy who made everyone laugh, the friend who never changed, the spark behind Ozzy's wild energy. In the early 1970s, something heavy and raw erupted from Birmingham. It was loud, dark, and unapologetic. It was the birth of Black Sabbath. For Ozzy and Tony, music wasn't just art. It was survival, expression, and rebellion against a life that seemed predetermined. Their debut album, Black Sabbath, released in 1970, was a storm. The opening church bells and thunder warned listeners this was unlike anything before. Tony's guitar was otherworldly, and Ozzy's voice pierced the air, haunting and powerful. Months later, Paranoid cemented their fame. Songs like Iron Man, War Pigs, and the title track Paranoid became anthems for the restless, misunderstood youth. Their music was raw, bold, and deeply emotional. Subsequent albums, Master of Reality, Volume 4, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage, pushed boundaries further. Tony's guitar innovations, despite losing fingertip portions in a factory accident, created Sabbath's signature sound. Meanwhile, Ozzy's lyrics became intensely personal, confronting addiction, mental struggles, and the darker side of fame. By the mid-70s, Black Sabbath was a global phenomenon. Packed arenas, millions of albums sold, and critical influence across generations solidified their legacy. Yet pressures mounted, and cracks appeared. Despite everything, the bond between Ozzy and Tony endured. Tony once reflected, "What we created together was bigger than either of us." Their history, the schoolyard dreams, the hardships, the friendship, anchored them through turbulence. Their songs weren't just entertainment. They were lifelines for those who felt different or lost. Initially, critics misunderstood them, but bands like Metallica, Slayer, and Iron Maiden later hailed Black Sabbath as their greatest inspiration. By the end of the decade, over 75 million records had been sold. Beyond numbers, the band proved that two boys from a poor neighborhood could leave a permanent mark by staying true to themselves. By the late 70s, fame began to take its toll. Ozzy struggled with substance abuse, missed rehearsals, and personal chaos. In 1979, Tony made the agonizing decision to ask Ozzy to leave the band, not out of anger, but fear for his friend's well-being. Black Sabbath continued with singers like Ronnie James Dio and Ian Gillan, but something essential was missing: the unique spark between Ozzy and Tony. Ozzy's life spiraled before he rebuilt it, enduring rehab, jail, and personal loss. Yet his solo career flourished, producing classics like Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley. Meanwhile, both men felt the unfinished chord between them. After years apart, reconciliation finally came in 2011. Laughter, memories, and music flowed naturally. In 2013, 13 was released, their first album together in 35 years, reaching #1 in countries including the United Kingdom and United States. Their final tour, The End, wasn't just a series of shows. It was a journey through their shared history, trials, and victories. Fans wept as Ozzy, older but resilient, performed alongside Tony once more. Songs slowed, voices were rougher, yet the emotional weight and authenticity were undeniable. Tony later said, "We'd been through everything: fame, addiction, loss. Standing next to Ozzy again, it felt like home." For both musicians and fans alike, this reunion was more than music. It was a testament to enduring friendship, resilience, and the power of shared dreams. But even as crowds cheered, some feared this might be Ozzy's last time on stage. Why did that thought linger in the hearts of fans, and what moments sparked that worry? Let's explore the final chapter of a legend's performance. The final curtain, Ozzy Osbourne's last performance.
Really astonishing thought that he was just holding out to do it, because this meant everything to him, didn't it, doing this concert?
On the evening of July 5th, 2025, Villa Park Stadium in Birmingham became the scene of something unforgettable. Ozzy Osbourne, the voice of Black Sabbath, a pioneer of heavy metal and a global icon, performed for the last time. But this wasn't a typical concert. It was his final message to the world. Parkinson's disease and recent spinal surgeries had made standing impossible, so he sat on a specially crafted leather throne with wings, designed just for him. That throne wasn't just a chair. It symbolized resilience, courage, and a spirit that refused to yield. More than 45,000 fans packed the stadium, while nearly 6 million watched from home. What many expected to be a grand comeback turned into something much deeper, a heartfelt farewell from a legend. The show, aptly titled Back to the Beginning, honored Birmingham, the city where Ozzy's journey started and where he first met Tony Iommi. That night, the original members of Black Sabbath reunited for the first time in 20 years. There were no extravagant light displays or pyrotechnics, just raw, honest music. The performance wasn't about spectacle. It was a deeply personal moment between Ozzy and his fans. Bands like Metallica, Slayer, Guns N' Roses, Tool, and Pantera also joined, paying tribute to the man who changed heavy metal forever. The audience was awestruck. Tears flowed freely as Ozzy gave every ounce of his remaining strength. His voice, though weakened by age and illness, carried decades of pain, triumph, and passion. Backstage, Tony Iommi noted how Ozzy had pushed himself just to reach that stage. It was clear to everyone, it was more than a show, it was goodbye. After the performance, Ozzy avoided any big celebration. Exhausted, he was wheeled quietly into his dressing room to rest. Before leaving, he made a final visit to Tony, smiling faintly and said, "It went all right, didn't it?" That simple question spoke volumes. It was his quiet way of affirming that his life, his music, and his journey had reached their perfect conclusion. 2 weeks later, on July 21st, Ozzy passed peacefully at his home in Buckinghamshire, surrounded by his wife Sharon and their children. He was 76. The world awoke to the devastating news. Tributes poured in from fans and fellow musicians, including Elton John and James Hetfield, who celebrated his transformative influence. Fans lit candles at his childhood home in Aston, mourning a voice that had touched millions. The farewell concert raised over £140 million for Parkinson's research and Birmingham Children's Hospital. Yet its true legacy was far beyond money. Ozzy said goodbye not with words, but through his presence, his music, and his courage. When Paranoid played for the final time, the stadium held its breath. No fireworks, no grand finale, just Ozzy's trembling hand, Tony's tearful eyes, and a silent, understanding crowd. In that moment, the world didn't just lose a musician, it lost a singular, irreplaceable soul. Even after the stage lights dimmed, Tony Iommi remained with the echoes of that night, carrying memories that no one else could fully grasp. In his words afterward, he captured what millions felt. There would never be another Ozzy. Yet behind that statement, Tony revealed something private, a final, heartbreaking secret that would leave fans in tears once more. The confession and the final bond.
That we think he held out to do it, and just after that, he's done it and said goodbye to the fans.
In the closing chapter of Ozzy and Tony's shared journey, something profound emerged, more personal and meaningful than any music they had ever created. It wasn't just about the riffs or the songs. It was about reclaiming a bond that went far beyond the stage. They hadn't simply regained a bandmate, Tony had regained a brother. Unlike so many other legendary partnerships that ended in silence or resentment, theirs told a story of forgiveness, second chances, and resilience. Even after decades of chaos and mistakes, they had returned stronger, reminding everyone that some connections are unbreakable. When Ozzy passed away, tributes flooded the music world. Yet among the countless messages of grief and admiration, one voice stood out, Tony Iommi's. To him, this wasn't the death of a performer. It was the loss of a lifelong companion shaped by hardship, rebellion, and music. When asked to describe Ozzy, Tony's response was simple, heartfelt, and layered with sorrow. The kind of words that could only come from someone who had truly shared a life. Tony didn't recall the fame or the stages first. He remembered the laughter, the behind-the-scenes jokes, the mischievous faces Ozzy would pull to lighten tense moments. These spontaneous glimpses of Ozzy's spirit were his signature. They reminded everyone that even in darkness, joy could exist. And yet, alongside those memories, Tony felt the ache of the past. He relived the high points of fame, the overwhelming success, and also the long stretches when Ozzy had been distant, battling addiction and personal demons. He thought of the months when Ozzy had seemed unreachable, when the world only saw the headlines but not the private struggles behind them. And still, against all odds, they found their way back. Their reunion in 2013, for the album 13 and the global tour that followed, was far more than a musical comeback. It was a rekindling of their friendship, a restoration of the rhythm they had lost, both in music and in life. During that time, Ozzy often reflected with humor and humility about the luck of still being able to create, to perform, and to share moments that mattered. But one confession stayed with Tony more than anything else. Just days before their final concert, Ozzy quietly admitted he didn't know if he would make it through the night. Yet he added with quiet conviction that if he were to leave this world, he would rather do so singing in Birmingham than lying in a hospital bed. Those words stayed with Tony long after, echoing louder than any guitar solo ever could. Tony believed Ozzy understood the end was near, and he chose to say goodbye on his own terms, through music in the city where their story began, surrounded by the fans and friends who mattered most. That final show was never about spectacle. There were no fireworks, no grand stage effects. Just Ozzy, seated in a leather throne, eyes heavy with fatigue, gripping the microphone as though it were his final tether to life. He poured everything into that night, every emotion, memory, and bit of his legacy. When he left the stage, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, dignified, and final. For Tony, it marked the closing of a story more than 50 years in the making. A tale of sound, sorrow, laughter, and unshakable friendship. Ozzy, the Prince of Darkness, had once been a boy from Aston, with wild dreams, mischief in his heart, and a voice that could transcend his struggles. He never pretended to be anything other than himself. He lived boldly, loved fiercely, and never apologized for his intensity. His legacy extends far beyond music. It lives in the strength he gave his fans, the courage he inspired, and the wild, untamed energy that became a source of comfort for many. From packed arenas to quiet hospital rooms, Ozzy's music offered more than entertainment. It provided sanctuary. To Tony, and to the millions who loved him, that is why Ozzy will live on forever. Ozzy Osbourne's voice may have fallen silent, but his spirit echoes in every note, every memory, and every fan who felt his music touch their life. From the streets of Birmingham to stages around the world, he lived boldly, loved fiercely, and left a legacy that no one can replace. Tony Iommi's words remind us that their bond was more than music. It was brotherhood, a story of friendship, resilience, and heart. Though Ozzy is gone, his music, his courage, and his unforgettable presence will live on forever. The legend may have ended, but the impact will never fade.